My son shouted those words at me on what should have been the happiest day of his life. The best wedding gift you could give me is your disappearance. You're the worst father. I stood there in my best suit, watching my only child's face twist with years of built-up resentment, and I realized he meant every word. What happened next changed everything, because when Benjamin Mitchell's son told him to disappear, he took those words literally. What followed was a journey that would teach a stubborn father the difference between loving someone and controlling them, and show him that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to let go. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Benjamin Mitchell's eyes opened at exactly 6:30, just as they had every morning for the past 43 years. No alarm clock needed. His internal timepiece had been calibrated by decades of managing the morning shift at Riverside Manufacturing. Even 4 years into retirement, his body refused to break the habit. He swung his legs over the side of the king-sized bed, noting the empty space where Catherine used to sleep. 10 years had passed since pancreatic cancer had claimed his wife, but Benjamin still found himself reaching for her hand in those drowsy moments between sleep and wakefulness. The house felt too quiet without her gentle breathing, too orderly without her scattered books and reading glasses on the nightstand. The morning routine was sacred. Shower first hot water for exactly 8 minutes. Shave with the same electric razor Catherine had bought him for their 20th anniversary. Dress in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, even though his only appointments were with the garden and his morning coffee. Standards mattered, Catherine used to say, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. In the kitchen, Benjamin ground coffee beans with mechanical precision. 2 tablespoons per cup water heated to exactly 195 degrees. While the coffee brewed, he arranged his breakfast: 2 pieces of whole wheat toast butter, spread to the edges orange marmalade, Catherine's favorite brand, which he still bought out of habit. He carried his steaming mug to the kitchen table and sat in his usual chair, facing the framed photograph that held the place of honor beside the sugar bowl. Catherine smiled back at him from their 25th anniversary celebration, her silver hair catching the restaurant's candlelight, her eyes bright with the laughter that had drawn him to her 47 years ago. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered, as he did every day. Another lovely spring morning in Blue Ridge. Through the kitchen window he could see Catherine's garden awakening. The daffodils she'd planted were pushing through the soil, and the apple tree showed the first hints of green buds. Benjamin maintained every flower bed exactly as she'd designed them, consulting the detailed garden journal she'd kept for 30 years. The neighbors often complimented him on the yard, never knowing that every planted bulb and pruned rosebush was a love letter to his late wife. The phone's shrill ring at 7:15 startled him from his reverie. Benjamin frowned at the interruption. His morning coffee time was inviolate, and everyone who mattered knew it. The caller ID displayed Daniel, son, which immediately shifted his annoyance to concern. His 38-year-old son never called this early unless something was wrong. "Daniel, is everything all right, Dad?" "Yes, everything's great. Better than great, actually." Daniel's voice bubbled with excitement Benjamin hadn't heard since his son was a teenager. "I have news, and I wanted you to be the first to know." Benjamin relaxed slightly, setting down his coffee mug. "Well, don't keep me in suspense. I'm engaged." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Her name is Sarah, and she's wonderful, Dad. We're planning the wedding for June." For a moment, Benjamin felt pure joy. His son, his only child, had found love. Catherine would have been over the moon, probably already planning bridal showers and rehearsal dinners. "Daniel, that's fantastic news. Congratulations, son. When do I get to meet her? Soon, I hope." "Maybe this weekend. I know you're going to love her, Dad. She's kind, intelligent, funny, everything I could ask for in a partner." Benjamin smiled, genuinely pleased. "Tell me about her. What does she do?" "She works at the community library. She's the head of their literacy program, and she's amazing with kids. She grew up here in Blue Ridge, actually, so she knows the town well. The community library." Benjamin's smile faltered slightly, though he kept his voice warm. "That sounds very fulfilling. What about her family? Her background?" "Her father owns an automotive shop, and her mother works part-time at the grocery store. They're wonderful people. Dad's salt of the earth, you know. Sarah's got a college degree in library science, and she's passionate about her work. She's writing a book about local history in her spare time." Benjamin processed this information carefully. Automotive shop owner, grocery store clerk, community librarian. Perfectly respectable occupations, certainly, but hardly what he'd envisioned for his son's future wife. Daniel had graduated summa cum laude from Penn State, had been accepted to law school before deciding on his current position in city planning. Surely he could have found someone more ambitious, someone who shared his potential for greater things. She sounds lovely, Benjamin said, because that's what fathers were supposed to say. I'm looking forward to meeting her. I was hoping we could have dinner this weekend. Sarah's excited to meet you, and I think you two will really connect. She reminds me of Mom in some ways. She's got that same gentle strength. The comparison to Catherine sent a small spike of irritation through Benjamin's chest. No one was like Catherine. Catherine had been extraordinary, beautiful, intelligent, well-read from a good family. She'd challenged Benjamin intellectually, pushed him to achieve more, supported his climb from factory floor to management. This Sarah might be perfectly nice, but comparing her to Catherine seemed premature at best. Of course, Benjamin replied smoothly. Why don't you bring her by for Sunday dinner? I'll make that pot roast recipe your mother used to love. That would be perfect, Dad. Thank you. I can't wait for you to see how happy she makes me. After they hung up, Benjamin sat staring at Catherine's photograph. His wife gazed back with that knowing smile, as if she could read his thoughts across the divide of death. What do you think, sweetheart? He asked the empty kitchen. Our boy's getting married. But Catherine's photo offered no guidance, and Benjamin found himself wondering if Daniel was settling for comfortable mediocrity instead of reaching for something extraordinary. The boy had always been too easily satisfied, too willing to choose the path of least resistance. Perhaps it was time for his father to provide some gentle guidance to help him see that love was wonderful, but love combined with ambition and social compatibility was even better. Benjamin rose from the table, already planning his approach. He would meet this Sarah with an open mind, of course, but he would also make sure his son understood all his options before making such a momentous decision. After all, that's what good fathers did. The Chen family lived on Elm Street in a neighborhood Benjamin remembered as solidly working-class, modest ranch homes with small front yards and driveways that housed practical sedans rather than luxury cars. As he pulled up to the address Daniel had given him, Benjamin noted the well-maintained exterior, fresh paint, neat landscaping, and a small garden where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Nothing flashy, but respectable. Sarah answered the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching for his arrival. She was smaller than he'd expected, probably no more than 5'3", with straight black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and intelligent dark eyes that met his directly. "Mr. Mitchell, please come in. We're so happy you could join us." Her voice was soft but clear, with no trace of nervousness, despite what Benjamin assumed must be the intimidating prospect of meeting her fiancé's father for the first time. The interior of the home surprised him. While modest in size, it was tastefully decorated with a mixture of American furniture and subtle Asian touches, a beautiful silk screen depicting mountains and cranes, delicate porcelain vases, and family photographs that told the story of the American dream in progression. The earliest photos showed a young Asian couple in what appeared to be the 1,980 seconds, followed by images of growing prosperity, graduations, family vacations, and the gradual accumulation of the comfortable middle-class life. "My parents will be right out," Sarah said, leading him to a living room where Daniel was already seated on a navy blue sofa. "Mom's just finishing up in the kitchen, and Dad should be home from the shop any minute." Benjamin settled into an armchair and accepted the offer of tea, watching as Sarah performed what was clearly a practiced ritual. She brought out a beautiful tea set. Not the everyday variety, but delicate china with a blue and white pattern that looked authentically Chinese. Her movements were precise and graceful as she warmed the pot, measured the tea leaves, and poured the water at exactly the right temperature. "This is oolong tea from my grandmother's region in Taiwan," she explained, offering him a cup. "She taught me the proper way to prepare it when I was young." Benjamin sipped the tea, surprised by its complexity and subtle flavor. It was nothing like the simple tea bags he occasionally used at home, and he found himself genuinely impressed by the ceremony's quiet dignity. Dorothy Chen emerged from the kitchen, a petite woman in her early 50s who shared her daughter's gentle demeanor but carried herself with the slight stiffness of someone unaccustomed to entertaining. She wore a simple floral dress and pearl earrings that Benjamin suspected were her best jewelry brought out for the occasion of meeting her future son-in-law's father. "Mr. Mitchell, welcome to our home," she said, offering a slight bow that seemed natural rather than affected. "Sarah has told us so much about Daniel, and we're delighted to finally meet his family." Before Benjamin could respond, the front door opened, and a man's voice called out, "Sorry, I'm late. Had to finish Mrs. Patterson's transmission before I could leave." David Chen, appeared in the doorway, still wearing work clothes with grease stains on his hands, looking embarrassed by his appearance. He was shorter than Benjamin, probably in his mid-50s, with calloused hands and the kind of practical demeanor Benjamin associated with men who worked with their hands for a living. "Give me 2 minutes to clean up," David said, disappearing toward what Benjamin assumed was a bathroom. When he returned, David had changed into clean slacks and a button-down shirt, his hands scrubbed clean but still bearing the permanent stains that marked a lifetime of mechanical work. He approached Benjamin with a firm handshake and an apologetic smile. "David Chen. Sorry about that. Saturdays are always busy at the shop, but I didn't want to keep you waiting." Dinner was served family style around a dining table that could comfortably seat 6. Dorothy had prepared an impressive spread roast chicken with herbs, steamed vegetables, rice, and several dishes that Benjamin didn't recognize but found surprisingly appealing. The conversation flowed naturally, with Sarah asking about his retirement and Daniel sharing stories about his city planning work. "So you owned the manufacturing plant?" David asked, passing Benjamin the vegetables. "Managed it," Benjamin corrected. "I worked there for 38 years, starting on the floor and working my way up to plant manager." David nodded with obvious respect. "That's impressive. Manufacturing's tough. You've got to understand every aspect of the operation to run it well." As the meal progressed, Benjamin found himself reassessing his initial assumptions. David spoke knowledgeably about business, local politics, and community affairs. When the conversation turned to Sarah's work at the library, her parents beamed with obvious pride. "She's always been our scholar," Dorothy said. "Even as a little girl, she had her nose in a book. We knew she'd do something with education. The literacy program she runs has helped over 200 adults learn to read," David added. "The mayor gave her a commendation last year. It was during dessert, a delicious apple pie that Dorothy insisted was made from scratch, that Benjamin learned something that completely shifted his perspective. "Business has been good lately," David mentioned casually. "We just hired 2 more mechanics, which brings us up to 12 employees. I never thought when I started the shop 25 years ago that we'd grow this big." Benjamin nearly choked on his pie. "You own the automotive shop, Chen's Automotive, over on Industrial Boulevard," David said with quiet pride. "Started with just me in one bay, but we've built a good reputation. We do everything from oil changes to complete engine rebuilds. Dad sponsors 3 Little League teams and serves on the school board," Sarah added, clearly proud of her father's community involvement. Benjamin felt his preconceptions crumbling. This wasn't a struggling working-class family barely getting by. David Chen was a successful small business owner who employed a dozen people and contributed meaningfully to the community. His shop was probably worth more than Benjamin's pension. "That's quite an accomplishment," Benjamin said, meaning it sincerely for the first time that evening. As they moved to the living room for coffee, Benjamin watched the family dynamics with new eyes. Sarah's quiet confidence made more sense now. She came from a family that valued both hard work and education, that had built something substantial from modest beginnings. Daniel fit naturally into their conversations, laughing at David's stories about difficult customers and asking Dorothy about her part-time work at the grocery store, which Benjamin now realized was probably more about staying active than financial necessity. Still, as the evening wound down and Benjamin prepared to leave, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was missing. The Chens were good people, better than he'd initially given them credit for. But were they the right people to help Daniel reach his full potential? Would this comfortable, modest life satisfy his son's ambitions, or would it encourage him to settle for less than he could achieve? "Thank you for a lovely evening," Benjamin said as Sarah walked him to the door. "You have a wonderful family." "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I hope we'll see you again soon." Driving home, Benjamin found himself more confused than before. His simple narrative about Daniel settling for less had become complicated by the reality of the Chen family's quiet dignity and genuine accomplishments. But questions remained, and as a father, wasn't it his responsibility to make sure his son had considered all the possibilities before making such a life-changing decision? Benjamin had spent the better part of a week researching wedding venues, printing brochures, and preparing what he considered a helpful presentation for Daniel and Sarah. His home office, lined with decades of management awards and family photographs, had been transformed into a wedding planning headquarters. Spreadsheets compared costs, amenities, and social standing of various locations throughout the region. When Daniel and Sarah arrived for their scheduled Sunday afternoon meeting, Benjamin had everything laid out with military precision on his mahogany desk. The same desk where he'd once reviewed production reports and managed a workforce of 200. "I've done some research," Benjamin announced. gesturing to his materials with the pride of a man who'd never approached any project halfway. I think you'll find these options much more suitable than what you've been considering. Sarah perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, wearing a simple blue dress and cardigan, her engagement ring, a modest solitaire that Benjamin privately thought could have been more impressive, catching the afternoon light. Daniel sat beside her, already looking uncomfortable, in the way Benjamin recognized from their son's teenage years, when discussions about grades or college applications were imminent. "Dad, we appreciate the help, but we've already pretty much decided," Daniel began. "Hear me out," Benjamin interrupted, pulling out the first brochure with a flourish. "Riverside Country Club. This is where your mother and I celebrated our 25th anniversary. The ballroom overlooks the golf course. They have an excellent catering staff, and the social connections alone make it worthwhile." He spread out the glossy photographs showing elegant table settings, crystal chandeliers, and well-dressed couples dancing on polished floors. The club represented everything Benjamin valued about proper society, tradition, refinement, and the kind of connections that open doors in business and social circles. Sarah studied the brochures politely, her dark eyes taking in every detail. "It's very beautiful, Mr. Mitchell, but it's not really us." Benjamin felt a familiar flutter of frustration. "What do you mean, not us? It's the finest venue in the area. Your guests would be impressed." "That's just it," Sarah said quietly. "We don't want to impress our guests. We want to celebrate with them." The distinction seemed meaningless to Benjamin. Weren't celebrations supposed to be impressive? Wasn't a wedding supposed to represent the best a family could offer? He pulled out additional brochures: the Marriott downtown, the historic mansion on Chestnut Hill, the new conference center with its modern amenities. Any of these would be more appropriate than— He paused, consulting his notes. The community center by the lake. Daniel's jaw tightened. "What's wrong with the community center?" "Nothing's wrong with it exactly," Benjamin said carefully. "It's just that for a Mitchell family wedding we should aim higher. People will remember this day for the rest of your lives." "Don't you want it to be special?" "It will be special because we're getting married," Sarah said, her voice still gentle but with an undertone Benjamin hadn't heard before. "The location doesn't make the marriage." Benjamin felt his carefully prepared presentation slipping away from him. He pulled out his trump card, the financial argument. "Money isn't the issue here. I'm happy to cover the difference in cost. Consider it my wedding gift to you both." The offer hung in the air like an uncomfortable silence. Daniel shifted in his chair, and Benjamin could see the internal struggle playing out on his son's face, gratitude warring with something that looked uncomfortably like resentment. "Mr. Mitchell," Sarah said, and her tone had shifted from polite to something more definitive. "We truly appreciate your generosity, but we've chosen the community center because it's where Daniel and I had our first date. The lake is where he proposed. We want our wedding to be in a place that means something to us personally." "But surely you understand the importance of appearances," Benjamin pressed, feeling control of the situation slipping through his fingers like sand. "This is about more than just sentiment. It's about starting your marriage with the right foundation, the right connections." Sarah's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The polite, deferential young woman who had served tea in her parents' living room was gone, replaced by someone with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand that you want what you think is best for Daniel. I want what's best for him too. But best doesn't mean most expensive or most impressive to other people. Best means true to who we are and what we value." She leaned forward slightly, her voice remaining calm but carrying new authority. "We want our wedding to represent our values: community, family, authenticity. We want it to be a celebration that brings our families together, not a display designed to impress strangers." Benjamin stared at her, genuinely shocked. This was not the quiet, compliant girl he'd expected to manage. This was someone who had clearly thought through her positions and was prepared to defend them. "We're not trying to be difficult," Daniel added, reaching for Sarah's hand. "We just want our wedding day to feel like us." "And what about your future?" Benjamin asked, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to remain calm. "What about building the kind of life that will give you opportunities, connections, advancement?" "What about building the kind of life that makes us happy?" Sarah countered. "What about surrounding ourselves with people who love us for who we are, not what we can do for them?" The philosophical divide between them yawned like a chasm. Benjamin saw a young woman who was encouraging his son to settle for mediocrity, to choose comfort over ambition. Sarah saw a man who valued appearances over authenticity, who measured worth by external markers rather than internal satisfaction. I think we should go, Daniel said, quietly standing and helping Sarah to her feet. Dad, we appreciate that you want to help, but we've made our decision. Benjamin watched them gather their things, feeling the familiar panic that came when situations moved beyond his control. This wasn't how the meeting was supposed to go. They were supposed to see the wisdom of his suggestions, the value of his experience and connections. Daniel, wait, he called as they reached the office door. We need to talk about this more, just you and me. His son turned back, and Benjamin saw something in Daniel's expression that reminded him uncomfortably of Catherine during their rare, serious disagreements. A mixture of love and disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. Maybe later, Dad. When you're ready to listen instead of just telling us what we should want. After they left, Benjamin sat alone in his office, surrounded by the rejected brochures and unused spreadsheets. The afternoon sun slanted through his windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the family photographs that documented a lifetime of achievements and milestones. He picked up the photograph from Daniel's college graduation, his son in cap and gown, Benjamin and Catherine flanking him with proud smiles. They'd had such hopes for Daniel, then such dreams about his future success and happiness. Now Benjamin wondered if those dreams were slipping away, replaced by Daniel's willingness to accept a smaller, more ordinary life. Someone needed to help his son see the bigger picture, to understand that love was wonderful, but love, combined with ambition and social advancement, was even better. Perhaps it was time for a more direct conversation, father to son, without Sarah's influence complicating the discussion. After all, that's what good fathers did. They provided guidance even when it wasn't initially welcome. Especially when it wasn't initially welcome. Benjamin chose Riverside Diner for their father-son lunch, the same red vinyl booth establishment where he and Daniel had shared countless meals during his son's high school years. The familiar setting was strategic. He hoped the nostalgic atmosphere would remind Daniel of simpler times when his father's guidance had been welcomed rather than resisted. Marge, the same waitress who'd served them chocolate chip pancakes after Daniel's baseball games 15 years ago, greeted them with a warm smile and knowing nod. The usual booth, Mr. Mitchell, please Marge, and could you bring Daniel his old favorite chocolate chip pancakes with extra syrup? Daniel looked embarrassed as they slid into the worn booth. Dad, I haven't eaten pancakes for lunch since I was 16. Indulge an old man, Benjamin said, attempting the kind of gentle humor that had once worked between them. Besides, we need to talk, and comfort food never hurt a difficult conversation. The pancakes arrived, steaming just as Benjamin remembered them, but Daniel only picked at the food while Benjamin gathered his thoughts. He'd rehearsed this conversation for days, choosing his words carefully to avoid the confrontational tone that had derailed their office meeting. Son, I've been thinking about your wedding, about your future, and I need to share some concerns with you. Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Dad, if this is about the venue again, it's not about the venue, Benjamin interrupted, though it was partially about the venue. It's about the bigger picture, about the choices you're making and whether they're truly in your best interest. He leaned forward, adopting the earnest tone he'd once used in performance reviews when trying to help struggling employees see their potential. Daniel, you're settling. You're a brilliant young man with a college degree, with opportunities most people only dream of, and you're choosing a life that's ordinary. What's wrong with ordinary? Daniel asked, his voice already carrying an edge of defensiveness. Nothing's wrong with it for ordinary people, Benjamin said carefully. But you're not ordinary. You could have anyone, a doctor, a lawyer, someone who would challenge you, intellectually push you to achieve more. Instead, you're choosing a small-town librarian who'll be content to keep you in this same small pond for the rest of your life. Daniel set down his fork with deliberate precision. Sarah doesn't keep me anywhere, Dad. She supports my choices. That's exactly the problem, Benjamin said, warming to his theme. A good partner should inspire you to reach higher, not just support whatever you decide to do. Your mother used to challenge me, push me to take risks, to aim for promotions I didn't think I deserved. That's how I became plant manager instead of staying on the factory floor. Sarah does challenge me, Daniel replied, his voice rising slightly. She challenges me to be kinder, more thoughtful, more connected to my community. She challenges me to think about what really matters in life. Benjamin felt his carefully planned approach beginning to fray. And what about financial security? What about building something significant? Remember, when you wanted to be a lawyer, you had plans, ambitions. I had your plans, Daniel interrupted. Your ambitions for my life. I chose city planning because I wanted to help communities grow and develop. I chose Sarah because she makes me happy and she shares my values. Happiness fades, Daniel. Achievement lasts. The words came out harsher than Benjamin intended, but he pressed on. I'm not saying Sarah isn't a lovely girl. I'm saying you could do better. You could find someone who brings more to the table, someone who would elevate your social standing, your professional prospects. Daniel's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. Listen to yourself, Dad. You're talking about my fiancée like she's a business decision. Marriage is partly a business decision, Benjamin said, falling back on the practical wisdom that had guided his generation. Love is important, but compatibility, shared goals, social and economic advantages, these things matter too. Not to me, they don't. The conversation was spiraling away from Benjamin's careful script, but he couldn't seem to stop himself. Years of watching Daniel make what he considered suboptimal choices, choosing psychology over pre-law city planning over corporate advancement, and now Sarah over someone more advantageous had built up like pressure in a steam engine. Your mother would want what's best for you, he said, playing what he considered his strongest card. The effect was immediate and explosive. Daniel's face darkened with an anger Benjamin had never seen before. Don't you dare speak for Mom, Daniel said, his voice shaking. Don't you dare use her memory to justify your snobbery. I'm not being snobby, I'm being realistic. Mom loved people for who they were, not what they could do for her, or how they looked to other people. Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength. She would have adored Sarah, and you know it. The only person Mom would be disappointed in right now is you. Benjamin felt as if he'd been physically struck. Daniel, you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it. Mom saw the good in everyone. She never once made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like my choices weren't valid, like the people I cared about were somehow beneath our family standards. I've never said anyone was beneath us. You don't have to say it, Dad. It's in every look, every suggestion, every helpful comment about how we could do better. You've been judging Sarah and her family since the moment you met them, and you've been judging me for choosing them. Benjamin scrambled to regain control of the conversation. I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. The only mistake I'm making is sitting here listening to this, Daniel said, starting to rise from the booth. Wait, Benjamin said desperately. Just hear me out. If you marry this girl, you're closing doors you don't even know are open. You're limiting your potential, your future, your children's opportunities. Daniel sat back down, but his posture remained rigid. My children's opportunities. Think about it, Daniel. What kind of connections will Sarah's family provide? What kind of social and professional networks? Her father owns a garage. Her mother works part-time at a grocery store. These are fine people, but they can't open the doors that the right marriage could open for you. I don't want those doors opened, Daniel said quietly. I want to build my own life, make my own way based on my own merits and values. Benjamin felt panic rising in his chest. His son was slipping away, choosing a path that would lead to mediocrity and missed opportunities. As a father, didn't he have a responsibility to prevent this mistake? Daniel, I'm asking you to reconsider this engagement. Take some time, meet other people, explore your options before you make such a permanent decision. And if I don't, the question hung between them like a challenge. Benjamin felt cornered, desperate, and he made the kind of ultimatum that had sometimes worked in business negotiations but had no place in family relationships. If you marry this girl against my advice, if you insist on making what I believe is a serious mistake, then I won't be part of this wedding. I won't stand by and watch you throw your life away. Daniel stared at him for a long moment, and Benjamin saw something die in his son's eyes, some last vestige of hope that his father might come around, might choose love over judgment. That's your choice, Dad, Daniel said, quietly standing up and pulling out his wallet to leave money for the untouched pancakes. Benjamin had expected capitulation, or at least negotiation. Instead, he got quiet dignity and what looked uncomfortably like disappointment. Daniel, wait. I'm not trying to be unreasonable. Yes, you are, Daniel said, not turning back. You're trying to control my life because you can't accept that I'm not you and I don't want the same things you wanted. I'm trying to be a good father. Daniel paused at that, looking back with an expression that combined love and sadness in a way that made Benjamin's chest tight. A good father would trust his son's judgment. A good father would want his child to be happy, not impressive. A good father would welcome the woman his son loves, not spend his time cataloging her deficiencies. He walked away, leaving Benjamin alone in the booth with cold pancakes and the growing realization that his attempt to save his son's future might have cost him his son entirely. Benjamin sat in the back row of folding chairs arranged on the lawn of the community center, his dark suit making him feel conspicuous among the casually dressed wedding guests. Despite his ultimatum 3 weeks ago, despite the cold silence that had stretched between him and Daniel since their disastrous lunch, He couldn't bring himself to miss his only son's wedding day. The lakeside setting was admittedly beautiful in the late afternoon June sunshine. White ribbons fluttered from the chairs, and mason jars filled with wildflowers created a rustic elegance that Benjamin had to grudgingly acknowledge was charming, if not sophisticated. The Chen family had clearly put considerable effort into the decorations, and Sarah's friends from the library had contributed handmade touches that spoke of genuine affection rather than hired professionalism. Benjamin watched the gathering crowd with a critical eye. There was David Chen in what appeared to be his best suit greeting guests with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own community. Dorothy Chen wore a pale blue dress and seemed to glow with maternal pride. Daniel's college friends mingled with Sarah's library colleagues, city hall employees, and what Benjamin assumed were various members of the extended Chen family. These were good people, Benjamin acknowledged reluctantly. Hardworking, genuine, the kind of neighbors who would help you move or bring casseroles when you were sick. But they were also ordinary people living ordinary lives, and Benjamin couldn't shake the feeling that his son deserved something more extraordinary. Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church took his place beneath the simple wooden arch decorated with climbing roses. The guitarist, a young man with long hair who Benjamin suspected was probably paid in pizza rather than professional fees, began playing a gentle melody that was pleasant enough, though Benjamin would have preferred something more traditional. The processional began with Sarah's maid of honor, followed by two bridesmaids in simple lavender dresses. Then the music shifted and everyone rose as Sarah appeared at the far end of the makeshift aisle. Benjamin's breath caught despite his reservations. Sarah looked radiant in a simple but elegant white dress that seemed to float as she walked. Her dark hair was swept up with small white flowers, and her face glowed with happiness that was impossible to deny. David Chen walked beside her with obvious pride, and when they reached the altar, Benjamin could see the gentle kiss he placed on his daughter's forehead before placing her hand in Daniel's. Daniel looked happier than Benjamin had ever seen him. His son's face was transformed with joy, and when he looked at Sarah, Benjamin saw the kind of love that Catherine used to talk about, the kind that made people better versions of themselves. Pastor Williams began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the joining of two families. The vows Daniel and Sarah had written themselves were personal and heartfelt, speaking of partnership, mutual respect, and building a life based on shared values rather than shared ambitions. Benjamin found himself moved despite his objections. This was clearly a marriage built on genuine affection and compatibility. But was affection enough? Would compatibility sustain them through the challenges that lay ahead? Wouldn't Daniel be happier in the long run with someone who could offer him more opportunities, more connections, more possibilities? If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, Pastor Williams intoned, "Speak, now or forever hold your peace." The traditional words hung in the warm air, and Benjamin felt his heart racing. This was his last chance, his final opportunity to save his son from what he genuinely believed was a limiting mistake. Around him, the wedding guests sat in comfortable silence, clearly expecting the ceremony to continue without interruption. Benjamin stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the ground seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon. Heads turned, and he heard several sharp intakes of breath as the assembled guests realized what was happening. "I do," Benjamin said, his voice carrying across the lawn with the authority he'd once used to address factory meetings. "I have something to say." Daniel's face went white, then flushed with what Benjamin recognized as humiliation and rage. Sarah stood frozen, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Pastor Williams looked genuinely shocked. In 30 years of performing weddings, he'd clearly never had anyone actually interrupt at this moment. "Mr. Mitchell," Pastor Williams said carefully. "This is highly unusual," Daniel Benjamin said, ignoring the pastor and addressing his son directly. "You're making a decision you'll regret. You're a brilliant young man with unlimited potential, and you're choosing to limit yourself." The words came out exactly as he'd rehearsed them during the sleepless nights since their confrontation at the diner. Logical, reasonable paternal guidance, offered at the moment when it could still make a difference. "Sarah," he continued, turning to his son's bride, "you're a lovely young woman, and I'm sure you care for Daniel very much. But caring isn't enough. You can't give him the kind of life he deserves, the kind of opportunities he needs to reach his full potential." He gestured toward the assembled guests, most of whom were staring at him in horror. "Look around you. These are fine people, but they're ordinary people. Daniel isn't ordinary. He could be anything, a lawyer, a businessman, a leader in this community. Instead, he's choosing to settle for a comfortable, limited life that will never challenge him to become everything he could be." The reaction was not what Benjamin had expected. Instead of thoughtful consideration of his points, instead of recognition that he was speaking difficult truths out of love, the guests began to murmur among themselves with what sounded distinctly like disapproval. How could he do this? Benjamin heard someone whisper. Poor Sarah, said another voice. What kind of man ruins his own son's wedding? Sarah, who had stood frozen during Benjamin's speech, suddenly stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the lawn. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry you feel that way about me and my family. But I love your son, and he loves me. We've chosen to build our life together based on that love and on shared values that matter to us. She turned to Daniel, whose face was a mask of hurt and anger. If you want to stop the ceremony, I'll understand. But if you want to continue, then I'm ready to become your wife, regardless of anyone else's objections. The crowd's murmur shifted to something that sounded like approval and support. Benjamin heard scattered voices. Continue the ceremony. Don't let him ruin this beautiful day. Sarah, you're handling this with such grace. Pastor Williams, who had been standing in shocked silence, found his voice. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to either take your seat or leave the premises. This is a sacred ceremony, and you're disrupting it. Benjamin looked around at the faces surrounding him and realized with growing horror that his carefully planned intervention had backfired completely. Instead of seeing him as a concerned father offering necessary guidance, these people saw him as a cruel man who had publicly humiliated a young bride on her wedding day. I was only trying to, he began. Dad, sit down. Daniel's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. Sit down right now, or leave. Benjamin had expected support, or at least understanding. He had expected people to recognize that he was speaking from experience, from wisdom, from a father's love. Instead, he found himself the object of collective disapproval from an entire community that had just watched him attack one of their own. He sat down heavily, his face burning with embarrassment and confusion. Around him, the guests slowly settled back into their chairs, but the comfortable joy of the ceremony had been shattered. Pastor Williams cleared his throat and attempted to restore the sacred atmosphere, but Benjamin could feel the hostile glances directed his way. As the ceremony continued, Benjamin realized that his attempt to save his son had instead isolated him completely. He had become the villain in a story where he'd intended to be the hero, and the recognition of his miscalculation settled over him like a cold weight in his chest. The marriage would proceed. His relationship with Daniel was probably destroyed, and he had accomplished nothing except making himself an object of community scorn on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life. Benjamin stood abruptly and walked toward the parking area, his face burning with embarrassment and confusion. The murmur of disapproval from the wedding guests followed him like a physical weight, and he could feel dozens of eyes tracking his retreat. Pastor Williams had resumed the ceremony behind him, but Benjamin could hear the strain in the minister's voice as he tried to restore the sacred atmosphere that had been so thoroughly shattered. He had almost reached his car when he heard rapid footsteps on the gravel behind him. Dad, wait. Benjamin turned to see Daniel striding toward him, his face flushed with an anger that Benjamin had never seen before. His son had loosened his tie, and his wedding boutonniere hung askew, but it was the expression in Daniel's eyes that stopped Benjamin cold, a mixture of rage, hurt, and something that looked like years of suppressed resentment. Finally, boiling over. How could you? Daniel's voice shook with fury. How could you do that to us? To Sarah. On our wedding day, Benjamin felt his own defensive anger rising. I was trying to help you see reason, Daniel's voice cracked. You call publicly humiliating my bride reason. You call disrupting our wedding ceremony reason. Someone had to speak the truth, Benjamin said, falling back on the righteousness that had sustained him through his decision to intervene. Someone had to help you see that you're making a mistake that will limit your entire future. My mistake. Daniel stepped closer, and Benjamin could see the tremor in his son's hands. The only mistake here is thinking that you had any right to do what you just did. I'm your father. I have every right to be concerned about your choices. Concern. Daniel's laugh was bitter and harsh. This isn't concern, Dad. This is control. This is you deciding that your vision of my life matters more than my own happiness. Benjamin felt the conversation spiraling away from him just as it had at the diner, just as every interaction with his son seemed to do lately. Daniel, you're not thinking clearly. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Stop. Daniel's shout echoed across the parking lot. Just stop talking and listen to me for once in your life. The raw pain in his son's voice made Benjamin step back involuntarily. Do you have any idea what you just did in there? Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength and volume. Do you understand that you just told a woman I love in front of everyone we care about that she's not good enough for me, that her family isn't good enough, that her entire life is somehow inadequate? I never said she wasn't good enough. That's exactly what you said. Maybe not in those words, but that's exactly what everyone heard, including Sarah. Daniel's face was red now, years of careful politeness and patient deference cracking like a dam under pressure. And you know what the worst part is? You think you're being loving. You think this is what good fathers do. Benjamin felt something cold settling in his chest. I am being loving. Everything I've done has been because I love you and want what's best. No, Daniel's voice broke completely. This isn't love, Dad. This is selfishness. This is you trying to live your life through me, trying to make me into some version of success that will make you feel better about yourself. The accusation hit Benjamin like a physical blow. That's not true. Isn't it? Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but his voice remained strong. When have you ever asked me what would make me happy? When have you ever supported a decision I made without trying to modify it, or improve it, or explain why I could do better? Benjamin opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel wasn't finished. I love Sarah. I love her kindness, her intelligence, her values, her family. I love the life we're planning together. But none of that matters to you because it doesn't match your idea of what my life should look like. I just want you to have opportunities. I have opportunities. I have a job. I love a woman who loves me, a community that supports us. But apparently that's not enough for you because it's not impressive enough, not prestigious enough, not worthy of the Mitchell family name. Benjamin felt his carefully constructed arguments crumbling. Son, you're overreacting. Am I? Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more force than his shouting had. Am I overreacting to watching my father publicly humiliate the woman I'm marrying? Am I overreacting to years of feeling like nothing I do is ever quite good enough for you? The words hung between them like an accusation, and Benjamin realized with growing horror that his son was serious, that this wasn't just wedding day stress or temporary anger, but something much deeper and more damaging. Daniel, I never meant to make you feel. You want to know what would make me happy, Dad. Daniel interrupted his voice, gaining a terrible clarity. You want to know what would be the best wedding present you could give me? Benjamin nodded, desperate for some way to bridge the chasm that seemed to be opening between them. Your disappearance. The words hit Benjamin like a physical blow. He actually stepped backward, his mouth opening in shock. That's right, Daniel, continued, his voice steady now but filled with pain. The best gift you could give me and Sarah would be to disappear from our lives, to stop trying to control us, stop judging us, stop making us feel like we're constantly disappointing you. Daniel, you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it. Daniel's voice was quiet but implacable. You're the worst father I could have asked for. Not because you don't love me, but because your love comes with so many conditions, so many expectations, so much judgment that it doesn't feel like love at all. Benjamin felt something break inside his chest. His son, his only child, the person he loved most in the world, had just told him that his love felt like punishment. You want me to disappear? Benjamin heard his own voice, as if from a great distance, cold and formal. Fine. Dad, wait! Daniel's voice suddenly changed as if he realized he'd gone too far. No, Benjamin said, his tone matching the ice he felt spreading through his veins. You've made yourself perfectly clear. You want me out of your life. You think I'm the worst father you could have asked for. Message received. He turned toward his car, but Daniel caught his arm. Dad, I was angry. I didn't mean. Benjamin pulled free with more force than necessary. Yes, you did mean it. And you know what? You're right. If my love feels like judgment to you, if my concern feels like control, if my presence in your life makes you unhappy, then maybe the best thing I can do is honor your request. That's not what I. Enjoy your wedding, Daniel. Enjoy your ordinary life with your ordinary wife in your ordinary little world. I won't be there to disappoint you anymore. Benjamin got into his car and started the engine, his hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos in his chest. Through the windshield, he could see Daniel standing in the parking lot, his face a mixture of regret and residual anger. As he drove away, Benjamin caught a glimpse of the wedding reception area in his rearview mirror. The guests were beginning to gather around tables decorated with mason jars and wildflowers, and he could see Sarah in her white dress surrounded by people who loved and supported her. His son had chosen his life, and apparently that life didn't include his father. Fine. If that's what Daniel wanted, that's exactly what he would get. Benjamin sat in his home office that evening, staring at Catherine's photograph, while the echo of Daniel's words reverberated in his mind. The best wedding present you could give me is your disappearance. His son had spoken in anger in the heat of a moment when emotions ran high, but the words had been clear and unambiguous. Fine. If Daniel wanted him to disappear, then that's exactly what Benjamin would do. He pulled out his address book and found the number for Michael Lawrence, the real estate agent, who had helped him refinance the house 3 years earlier. It was nearly 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, but Benjamin didn't care about social conventions anymore. Michael, this is Benjamin Mitchell. I need to sell my house immediately. Benjamin, is everything all right? It's rather late. I want it listed first thing Monday morning, price to sell quickly. 20% below market value if necessary. The efficiency with which Benjamin dismantled his life over the following 2 weeks surprised even him. 43 years of accumulated belongings were sorted with methodical precision, essential items packed into 2 suitcases, Catherine's jewelry and photographs carefully stored in a small box, everything else donated to charity or discarded entirely. The house sold within 6 days to a young family with twin toddlers who were charmed by Catherine's garden and the swing set Benjamin had built for Daniel's childhood visits. He watched from the kitchen window as they walked through the backyard, planning where to put a sandbox and discussing which apple trees produced the best fruit. Benjamin had researched coastal Maine towns with the same thoroughness he'd once applied to production schedules and quality control metrics. Seabrook appealed to him for its remoteness, a fishing village of fewer than 3,000 year-round residents, far enough from Blue Ridge that he'd never accidentally encounter anyone from his former life. The cottage he rented sight unseen was small but adequate, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a view of the harbor, and a living room with windows that faced the Atlantic. The landlady, a woman named Gladys Webb, met him at the property with keys and a concerned expression. "You sure you want to rent year-round?" she asked, studying Benjamin's formal clothes and city car with obvious skepticism. "Most folks who come here from away are looking for summer places. Winters can be pretty lonely." "Lonely is exactly what I'm looking for," Benjamin replied, signing the lease without reading it. The first month passed in a haze of routine establishment. Benjamin walked the rocky coastline each morning, bought groceries at the village market, and spent his evenings reading books borrowed from the tiny public library. He spoke to no one beyond necessary transactions and found a strange comfort in his anonymity. It was Margaret Walsh who broke through his self-imposed isolation. Benjamin first noticed her because she was the only other person who seemed to walk the shore path regularly, usually in the late afternoon when the light turned golden and the fishing boats returned to harbor. She appeared to be roughly his age, with silver hair that she wore in a practical bun and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent near the ocean. Their first interaction was purely practical. Benjamin had been walking the path when he came upon her, struggling with a heavy bag of what appeared to be beach stones. "Can I help you with that?" he asked, the first words he'd spoken to another human being in days. "Oh, how kind of you," she replied, accepting his assistance with the natural grace of someone accustomed to both offering and receiving help. "I'm collecting these for a garden project. I'm Margaret Walsh, but everyone calls me Maggie." "Benjamin Mitchell. I'm renting the cottage on Harbor Road." "Ah, you're Gladys's mysterious tenant." She mentioned someone from Pennsylvania had taken the place for a year. They walked together toward the village, and Benjamin found himself drawn into conversation despite his intentions to remain aloof. Maggie had taught high school English for 40 years before retiring to Seabrook, where she'd grown up. She was widowed like him and seemed to have found a peaceful rhythm in her coastal retirement. "What brings you to our little corner of Maine?" she asked as they reached her cottage, a neat Cape Cod with a garden full of late summer flowers. "I needed a change," Benjamin replied carefully. "My wife died some years ago, and I recently retired. Seemed like a good time for a fresh start. And family, children." The question hit Benjamin like a physical blow, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "A son. He has his own life." Something in his tone must have warned Maggie away from further questions, because she simply nodded and invited him for coffee the following afternoon. Their friendship developed slowly, built on shared walks, conversations about books, and Maggie's excellent cooking. She was intelligent and well-read, with the kind of gentle wisdom that came from decades of working with young people. Benjamin found her company surprisingly comforting, though he remained guarded about the circumstances that had brought him to Maine. It was during their 3rd week of regular coffee meetings that Maggie finally asked the question Benjamin had been dreading. "Benjamin, forgive me if I'm overstepping, but you seem like a man carrying a heavy burden. Sometimes it helps to talk about these things." Benjamin stared into his coffee cup, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. "My son and I had a disagreement. He made it clear that he didn't want me in his life anymore." And you took his words at face value. The question was asked gently, but it cut through Benjamin's carefully constructed narrative like a blade. He was very explicit about what he wanted. Maggie sipped her coffee thoughtfully. In my 40 years of teaching, I learned that young people often say things they don't mean when they're hurt or angry. The question isn't what they say in the heat of the moment, it's what they need from the adults who love them. Benjamin felt his defensive walls rising. He said he wanted me to disappear from his life. Those were his exact words. And so you did. I honored his request. Maggie set down her cup and looked at him with the kind of direct gaze that had probably terrified generations of students. Benjamin, did it ever occur to you that when someone you love tells you to go away, they might actually be asking you to fight for the relationship? The suggestion hit Benjamin like a physical blow. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? Think about it from a teacher's perspective. When a student acts out, pushes boundaries, says hurtful things, are they really asking to be abandoned, or are they testing whether you care enough to stick around? Despite their behavior, Benjamin felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. My son is 38 years old, not a teenager. Age doesn't matter when it comes to family dynamics, Maggie said gently. We all revert to our most basic fears and needs when we're dealing with the people who matter most to us. And sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt most deeply, because we know they're supposed to love us unconditionally. Benjamin stood abruptly, suddenly needing distance from this conversation and from Maggie's penetrating insights. I should go. Thank you for the coffee, Benjamin, Maggie called as he reached the door. Pride is expensive. Sometimes it costs us more than we can afford. Walking back to his cottage, Benjamin tried to push away Maggie's words, but they followed him like persistent seagulls. Had Daniel really wanted him to disappear, or had his son been expressing pain in the only way he knew how, hoping that his father would fight for their relationship, instead of simply walking away? The possibility that he had misunderstood, everything, that his literal interpretation of Daniel's angry words had been exactly the wrong response, settled over Benjamin, like a cold fog rolling in from the Atlantic. 2 years had passed since Benjamin's arrival in Seabrook, and his monthly supply runs to the larger grocery store in Rockland had become as routine as his morning walks along the shore. The drive took 25 minutes through pine forests and past rocky inlets, and Benjamin usually made the trip on Saturday mornings when the store was less crowded. This particular Saturday in late September, the autumn colors were at their peak, and Benjamin found himself driving more slowly than usual, appreciating the brilliant reds and golds that painted the main landscape. Maggie's gentle challenges to his narrative had become more frequent over the past few months, and he'd begun to wonder if his self-imposed exile was really the noble gesture he'd convinced himself it was, or simply an elaborate form of running away. The Hannaford supermarket was busier than he'd expected, filled with families doing their weekend shopping. Benjamin moved through the aisles with his usual efficiency, checking items off his carefully prepared list. He was approaching the checkout area when he heard a small voice that made him pause. "Daddy, can we get the cookies with the rainbow sprinkles, please?" Something about the cadence of the request, the particular way the child drew out the word please, struck Benjamin as familiar. He looked around and spotted the source, a little girl with blonde curls pulled into pigtails, wearing a bright red jacket and sitting in the child's seat of a shopping cart. The man pushing the cart had his back to Benjamin, but something about his posture, the way he leaned down to negotiate with his daughter, sent a jolt of recognition through Benjamin's chest. "Ellie, we already have cookies at home. How about we get some apples instead? You love the Honey Crisp ones." Benjamin's heart stopped. That voice, older, more mature than he remembered, but unmistakably familiar. He moved closer, his own shopping forgotten, and saw the profile that confirmed his suspicion. Daniel, his son, looking tired but patient as he navigated the eternal parent-child negotiation over grocery choices. And the little girl, Benjamin's granddaughter, a child he'd never met, never even known existed until this moment. "But Daddy, the rainbow cookies are so pretty," the little girl continued, swinging her legs and grinning at her father with the kind of irresistible charm that Benjamin remembered from Daniel's own childhood. "I know they're pretty, sweetheart, but we're trying to make healthy choices." Remember, Benjamin stood frozen in the cereal aisle watching this intimate family moment unfold. His granddaughter Emma, he remembered Sarah mentioning the name at their wedding, appeared to be about 3 years old. She had Daniel's smile, but Sarah's delicate features, and there was something about her animated gestures that reminded Benjamin powerfully of Catherine. It was Emma who noticed him first. Her bright brown eyes, Catherine's eyes, focused on Benjamin with the uninhibited curiosity of childhood. "Hi," she said, waving enthusiastically. "Are you buying groceries too?" Daniel looked up to see who his daughter was addressing, and Benjamin watched his son's face cycle through surprise, shock, and something that might have been pain. For a moment, neither man moved. Emma, don't bother strangers, Daniel said quietly, but his eyes never left his father's face. He's not bothering me, Benjamin managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. He approached the cart slowly, as if Emma were a wild animal he might frighten away. Hello there. What's your name? I'm Emma. I'm 3 years old, and I'm helping Daddy shop. I picked out the bananas all by myself. She pointed proudly to the bunch of bananas in the cart. Those are excellent bananas, Benjamin said, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. Up close, the resemblance to Catherine was even more striking, the same bright intelligence in her eyes, the same animated expressions. You have very good taste in fruit. Emma giggled, clearly pleased with the compliment. What's your name? Benjamin glanced up at Daniel, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of wariness and something that looked like longing. I'm Benjamin. It's very nice to meet you, Emma. Benjamin is a really long name, Emma observed, with the serious consideration that only small children could bring to such matters. Can I call you Ben? You can call me whatever you like, Benjamin said, feeling his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Daddy, Emma said, tugging on Daniel's shirt, this is my new friend Ben. He likes my bananas. Daniel's voice was carefully controlled when he spoke. Emma, this island. This is your grandfather. My father. Emma's eyes widened with delight. My grandfather. Like Grandpa Chen, yes, like Grandpa Chen, but on Daddy's side of the family. Benjamin watched his granddaughter process this information with the rapid adaptability of childhood. Within seconds, she had incorporated this new relationship into her understanding of the world. Grandpa Ben, she announced, as if trying out the title. I have 2 grandpas now. This is the best day ever. The simple joy in her voice nearly undid Benjamin completely. Here was unconditional love, untainted by the years of conflict and misunderstanding that had poisoned his relationship with Daniel. Emma didn't know about wedding disruptions or harsh words or 2 years of silence. She only knew that she had discovered a grandfather she hadn't known existed. Where do you live, Grandpa Ben? Emma asked, swinging her legs happily. Do you live near us? Can you come to my birthday party? It's next month, and Mommy said I can have a princess cake. Benjamin looked up at Daniel, who was struggling with his own emotions. I live in Seabrook, Benjamin said carefully. It's about 20 minutes from here. That's not very far. Emma clapped her hands. Daddy, can Grandpa Ben come have dinner with us? The question hung in the air between the 2 men, loaded with 3 years of hurt and misunderstanding. Daniel's face showed the internal battle between his residual anger and his love for his daughter, complicated by what Benjamin now recognized as his own pain at his father's abandonment. We'll see, sweetheart, Daniel said finally. Grandpa Ben might be busy. I'm not busy, Benjamin said quietly, the words coming out before he could stop them. I'm never too busy for family. The irony of the statement wasn't lost on either of them. Benjamin had spent 2 years being too busy, too hurt, too proud to reach out to the family he claimed to love. Daddy, why are you crying? Emma asked, noticing the tears in Daniel's eyes. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy, baby, Daniel said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Are you happy to see Grandpa Ben? Daniel looked at his father for a long moment. Yes, Emma. I'm happy to see Grandpa Ben. They completed their shopping in awkward but not unfriendly silence, with Emma chattering to both men about her preschool, her friends, and her excitement about Halloween costumes. In the parking lot, as they loaded groceries into their respective cars, Benjamin found his courage. Daniel, I know I don't have any right to ask, but could I? Could I write to you? To both of you, Daniel was quiet for so long that Benjamin began to think he wouldn't answer. Finally, he nodded. You can write to us. I can't promise anything beyond that, but you can write. Will you write me letters, Grandpa Ben? Emma asked from her car seat. I can't read them yet, but Daddy can read them to me. I would love to write you letters, Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. Would you like that? Yes. And I'll draw you pictures to send back. As Benjamin drove home to Seabrook, his hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years, hope. That evening he sat at his small kitchen table with a pad of paper and began to write. Dear Daniel and Emma, I don't know where to begin, except to say that meeting Emma today was the greatest gift I could have asked for. She is beautiful, intelligent, and joyful, everything a grandfather could hope for in a granddaughter. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness after the way I handled everything 2 years ago. I took your angry words literally when I should have heard the pain behind them. I walked away when I should have fought for our relationship. I let my pride cost me 2 years of Emma's life, and I will regret that for the rest of my days. I don't expect you to welcome me back with open arms. I don't expect you to forget the hurt I caused. But if you're willing, I would like to try to be the father and grandfather I should have been all along. I would like to learn to love without trying to control, to support without trying to direct, to be proud of who you are rather than disappointed in who you're not. Emma told me today that this was the best day ever because she discovered she had two grandpas. I hope that someday you might feel the same way about having your father back in your life. With love and hope, Dad Benjamin sealed the letter and placed it on his kitchen counter, ready to mail in the morning. Outside his window, the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and for the first time in 2 years, Benjamin felt like he was looking toward a future rather than hiding from his past. Sometimes the greatest act of love is admitting we were wrong. Benjamin Mitchell learned this lesson the hard way through 2 years of self-imposed exile, and the innocent eyes of a granddaughter who didn't know that families could be broken by pride and misunderstanding. Love isn't about controlling the people we care about. It's about trusting them to make their own choices, even when those choices don't match our dreams for them. It's about supporting their happiness rather than our expectations. And sometimes it's about having the courage to reach across the chasm we've created and ask for forgiveness. Benjamin's story reminds us that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the person our family needs us to be. Emma's unconditional love didn't erase the hurt he had caused, but it opened a door that pride had slammed shut. Whether Daniel would walk through that door remained to be seen, but for the first time in 2 years, Benjamin had hope. In the end, the best wedding gift he could give his son wasn't his disappearance. It was his willingness to return as a better man, a humbler father, and a grandfather ready to love without conditions. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.